it's much bigger than this. We'll see later there are actually many different types of software and many different software which are related to GIS or which are GIS software. GIS is not maps. Of course, it has to do with maps, but it's not only maps. It's more than maps, and this we will see also during the lecture. Something that is very important, it's not only for specialists. Very often you talk with people and they say, oh, GIS, you need to be an expert, I don't know how to use it. No, you can be an expert in GIS, of course. But with little or small skills, you can already do something with GIS. And that's what I hope for this lecture and this lab today, is to give you at least the first tools for you to go into it, to start, and to see how you can use it and what you can do with GIS. So if you want to be formal, GIS is a system for storing, editing, displaying geographic information on a computer. So this means, again, that it's not a map. We talk about data, we have to talk about the management of the data, we talk about the collection of the data. Someone mentioned GPS before. GIS is not GPS, but GPS is technology which belongs or can belong to a GIS system. So of course those things are very close. GIS is a science. Sometimes people ask me, how long do I need to learn GIS? It depends what you want to learn. You can spend your whole life learning about GIS or researching GIS. There is a whole field, an academic field behind it, or even several academic fields. So you will never be done learning about it. It's like, how long do I need to learn mathematics? You can actually answer such a question. And another thing for me which is extremely important, and I hope you will get it during the lecture today, GIS can be extremely useful in many sectors. It's not only about environment. Usually people associate GIS and maps with environmental studies or ecology or these kind of things. But we see that we can use those technologies in many different areas. Economics as well, marketing, political science, geopolitics, anthropology. Almost every field can use GIS technologies. I said that it's a system to store and manage and analyze geographic information. So what is geographic information? I heard already a few things that are interesting before, about those features, about putting things in the map, on the surface of the Earth. Geographic information is any data, any information that can be uniquely related to a place on Earth. It sounds a bit abstract, but can you try to give me, it sounds like a complex question, but it's actually a very, very easy question. Can you give me an example of geographic information?
Geographic information.
Yeah. And where are you now? Now, where are you completely? And where will you be in 2 hours? Somewhere else.
Yes.
So, anytime, whatever you do, you are somewhere. And we talked about Google Maps before. How can Google make so much money? Why do they give you some free apps on your smartphone? It's because they can track you, they know exactly where you are. And depending on where you are, they can give you, they can propose you some advertisement or some information about the restaurant or about a service which is located close to where you are now. So, of course, we are also kind of geographic information, which is interesting also for the companies. When I say that human beings are geographical information, think about a marketing company. You want to open a new business, and to open your business, you want to know where is your market. So you want to know where in Bishkek I have, for instance, lots of young people who can be interested to buy my new smartphone. So you need to know where those people are. You need to know where there is a higher concentration of young people, and there is a higher concentration of people with high salaries who can afford to buy my smartphone, and so on. So we also are, in some way, geographic information. Now I have a much more difficult question. Give me an example of information which is not geographic.
Can you be a little more specific? It's pretty broad.
Yes, on purpose. So we've seen now what is geographic information. So I want to know simply the opposite. Just it can be anything.
Mm-hmm.
What information would be non-geographic? Just based on what we've seen now. I know it's a very broad question, of course.
Political instability
can be this. Your name is also an geographic information. You as a person, you are somewhere, but your name is just an attribute. And this non-geographic information, we'll see also later, we can also work with that in ArcGIS because we have the location of features of you as a person or your oblast as a polygon, as a place. And then we can attach, for instance, to this geographic information, we can attach the population of the oblast, or we can attach the name of the oblast, and all these kind of things. So we have those two types of information. But if you think about it, if you think about the information that you use in your everyday life, most of it has a geographical component because you want to go from A to B, because you want to take a marshrutka or a taxi to go somewhere, because you are located somewhere, sorry. Because if you're working in natural resource management, you want to manage a forest, this forest has a surface and all these kind of things. So when we start thinking about it, we see that geographical information is actually everywhere. Based on what we saw now, what do you think? When do you think the first GIS analysis has been performed? Do you think it's something very new? Is it a new science? Is it a very old science? What do you think? Is it in the 20th century? What is in the first century? Was it last year?
I think it might be, for example, around 1980s.
1980s? Okay. Everybody agrees?
Maybe 60s.
Maybe 60s? Okay.
It's maybe 1990s or...
Okay, so it's the second half of the 20th century. But do you believe me if I say it was in 1854? And the point here is that GIS, as such, again, is a science. It has nothing to do with computers.
But you said it is with computers in the last ones.
Yes, that's a good point. It's computer because now that's how we do it. Of course, we use computers because if you want to do GIS without computers, you will spend lots of times calculating weird things, and computer can help us a lot. But what I want to show here is that GIS is actually also a way of thinking and a way of analyzing things. And there was this guy, Dr. John Snow, who is, at least in the history, officially the first one who performed the GIS analysis. So what his idea was basically just to make a first map, and you see without computer, this is the point here, just to draw a map and to put one point on each house where someone died from cholera. And beside this, you see now all those blue points, those are all the water pumps. Do you see something? Do you see already kind of a pattern? And like this. If you look like close to this water pump, this is where you have a higher concentration of people who died from cholera. So his intuition was just, let's try to find out if people somehow are closer to one pump, and let's analyze it. And indeed, this was the water pump which was contaminated. So you see, this is the logics when you want to do a GIS analysis. Of course, now you will use computers to make this because it's much quicker and much more efficient. But before you start typing anything in a computer, you have to think about what you want to analyze and how you want to analyze. Because this thing, we can do it in 20 seconds in a computer, no problem. But before you start, you need to know what you want to analyze and how you will do it. Okay, I will jump this one because otherwise it's a bit late. Now, I will quickly go through a few main concepts that are related to GIS. Someone mentioned the features earlier. When we work with GIS, we usually call that layers. We talk about thematic layers. So we will try to cut the reality in thematic layers. One could be the road network, one could be the rivers, one could be the administrative divisions, and so on and so forth. And you will have different files, each of which will represent one layer of reality, one aspect of the reality. Everything I will say now is maybe a little bit abstract and theoretical. Just keep it in the back of your head for now. And once we will move to the practical part this afternoon, I hope it will become a little bit clearer. The second concept that I want to talk about is this concept of vector and raster. If anyone has already been working with computers, computer software like Photoshop or these kind of things, maybe you have an idea. Or is it completely unknown to all of you what vector and raster would be? Nobody? No idea?
Vector, but
okay, so what is vector?
it's a line with the direction and magnitude.
In mathematics, yes, but here not. Yeah. Okay. But unfortunately, it's the same name. But here it's a different concept. So, I will first talk about this raster thing. You have to imagine that those are basically two different types of files, or two different types of ways to store and to analyze our geographical data. When we talk about raster, we actually talk about an image. So if you take a picture with your phone or with the camera, it will look like this. And what happens when you zoom in your picture?
It will get large.
It will get large, yes. So the first, when I zoom, I will start to see a bit more details. And when I zoom even more, it will start to get a bit blurry. And when I zoom even more, I start to see, what are those things here? Those squares? The pixels. Yes. So what is each pixel? Each pixel basically has just a value. And in such a picture, each pixel has a color value. It's blue, it's white, it's red, it's green. In GIS, it's exactly the same. When we work with raster data, we have data which is stored in this as a grid of pixels, where each pixel has a unique value. It can be a color, like in this picture, but it could be elevation, it could be population density, it can be anything like this. Again, we'll see later a bit more in detail what this means. But if I take this example of this drone image or satellite image, it's exactly the same. I see the Earth from above. This is also what you could see in Google Maps or Google Earth. And when you zoom, the cell, you see more details, and at some point you will see also those pixels, and each pixel corresponds to the color of the ground here. So this is what we call the raster model, the raster data in GIS. Vector is something completely different. Vector is kind of a geometrical model. So it's a bit more intuitive also. Let's say we have this map here of land cover and land use. You see we have some built up here in this building. Here we have some grass, we have a street, we have a water with an island with a forest in the middle of the water, and we have an agricultural field. When you work with vector, which happens most of the time, I mean, at least from what I understand from your background, this is what you might mostly work with in GIS. You define your objects geometrically. It means that this patch here, this field, has coordinates. I mean, you know the coordinates for each of those corners here, and you draw really the shape of this field. We will also see later. But what is the most important and the most interesting in this vector model is that each object here is related to something in a so-called attribute table. It means that if you have this agricultural field here, you will have one entry in the table that is here, and you can add any information that you want. Again, the size, you can add, the type of crops that you have here, and so on and so forth. Once again, this will become much clearer once you start playing with it this afternoon. Now there is a back and forth game always between this vector and raster. Sometimes you have to work with vectors, sometimes you have to work with raster, sometimes you have to mix them, sometimes you have to jump from one to the other. But I believe this can maybe help you also a little bit to better understand what it's all about. Here I took my vector map that I just showed you before, where I have my different polygons, here my field, here my built-up, and so on. If I put underneath this grid, the one with the raster, with the pixel, each cell of this grid is one raster cell. I can give to each of those pixels, I can give one value according to the object which is below it. If we look back at the table here, I don't know if you can read, but here we decided that grass has the value 1, built-up is 2, water is 3, agriculture is 5, forest is 6, and so on. So, in the pixels here, which are covered by agriculture, I give a value 5. In those ones, I give 1. Here, where I have water, I give 3, and so on. Is it more or less clear, or are you swimming? Yeah? Because it can be a little bit abstract. So, in the end, each pixel gets one unique value depending on the object which is below it, and you have then you have in the end your raster file, which is somehow the equivalent to the vector file that you had at the beginning. But remember, when you had your vector data, each object was defined geometrically, and now that we move to raster, we only have this grid. And of course, you can also play on the size of those pixels. You can have small pixels, you can have big pixels. And this is what we call the resolution. And if this is the starting data, the vector data, you can use a very fine resolution, or you can decide to go with a much coarser resolution. You see, we have bigger pixels, so we lose information. This is the starting point. This is high resolution raster, middle resolution, and low resolution. So if we lose information here, why would you want to make this one at all? Why do you think we might want to use this low resolution raster if we can have a high resolution one which has no information?
So you mean it's also useful?
This one is also useful, but why? Why would you want to use this one instead of this one?
It gives you more specific information.
Which one? This one? More specific?
I mean, in the more
Broad, I think.
Yeah.
We know there's a mountain, but we don't know how big.
Yes, exactly. But why do you want this? If, like in your example here, I know everything about the mountains. I see exactly how it looks like. And here I see just in general what this mountain looks like. So why do I want this if I can have this? What do you think?
to compare different objects.
Yes, it can be used to compare because maybe you have other data sets which are also very close. But the first evident reason is that when you work with GIS data, it's usually very heavy data, very heavy files, very big files. And we don't always have a very powerful computer. So sometimes you need to use low resolution data just also to make the processing quicker, or so that your computer doesn't wait for 1 hour every time you try to move the map. That's one. In some cases, if I want to work on the whole of Kyrgyzstan, I don't care about all small details. I want to see the big picture. So I will try to remove the fine details, and I just want to see in general how much forest I have here and how much water I have there. So it's the choice of the resolution, the choice of how precise you will be in your data, depends on what you want to do with it. Are you working at a very local level, and you want to study here in the garden the difference in between the stones and the grass and everything? Or do you want to work at the scale of the whole country? This is also something you have to keep in mind when you work with GIS, when you start working, at what scale do I want to work, which will tell you what kind of data, what precision of data, what resolution of data you need to have. Clear? More or less? Good. And for this we talk about resolution. When we talk about resolution, this is the size of the side of one pixel. And those pixels are always square, so the length here is the same as the length here. And when you measure the length of the side of this pixel, this is the resolution. So this raster here is a raster with a 1 kilometer or 1,000 meter resolution. And this is just a convention. This is how we characterize the resolution of raster files. Very concretely, we have, just want to show you a few examples of types of satellite images or raster data with these different types of resolutions. This is a so-called MODIS image. This is an image with a 250 meters resolution, so it's very close. It's something that you use usually for climatologic and meteorological purposes, where each pixel gives you the elevation of the piece of land, which is here. So in this case, with this SRTM, we have a resolution of 90 meters, so everywhere in the whole world, every square of 90 by 90 meters has this attributed one value of elevation, and then you can use this to make such kind of maps, for instance, to visualize the landscape, the background, which can be used just for mapping, for instance, as a background, but which can be used also to make analysis. And you can use this kind of data to find where are the steep slopes, for instance, which are dangerous with respect to avalanches or landslides, or these kind of things. If you want to work, you want to develop a new tourism resort, You might also use this kind of information, this kind of data to identify where you have more sun. Depending on the orientation, are you facing north or south or east or west? How many hours of sun do you get every year? And just, it will increase or decrease the attractivity of your place. In my study, or in my assessment. This is a theoretical definition somehow. I hope that with the information I gave you until now, that now you managed to understand somehow what this means. So the vector is so-called the object approach. If each object, each types of land use, as we saw before, for instance, is identified as an object, as a geometry, as an attribute table, and one example could be the oblast, so the administrative divisions in Kyrgyzstan, for instance, where each one has been drawn, and in the borders of each oblast has been drawn like this, and each one has a name, a population, a surface, any kind of other statistical information. And the raster approach is the so-called grid. We said that we have this grid, regular grid of pixels, where each pixel has the same size, and each size, oh sorry, there is a typo here. I don't know what I meant, but each cell has the same size, and each pixel has its own value. It can be color, it can be elevation, it can be anything like this. The question you might ask yourself now is when? I mean, how can I know if I should use vector data or raster data? Very generally, we said that for the discrete data we use vector, and for continuous data we use raster. What does it mean? Discrete data is, for instance, this administrative division. Here I am in Shui, and here I am in Narin, or somewhere else. I cannot be between both. You have a clear border, one object stops here, and the other one starts at the same point. So when you can very clearly define the limits of your objects, then you will usually use vector data. When we talk about continuous data, we talk about data like elevation in this case. Maybe here my elevation is 100 meters, here is 105, and here in between it's 102, and between it's 102.5. So you cannot draw limits like this. And each square centimeters, each square millimeters of Earth will have a slightly different value. So in those cases, this is very common for environmental or natural phenomena like precipitation, temperature, elevation, and so on. You will usually use raster data. But unfortunately, this is not a completely absolute rule. It's sometimes you will use vector data in other cases, raster data in other cases. Sometimes you have to mix, you have to change. This is something that comes also with the experience. Or when you work, you have sometimes to go a bit around this rule. But this is a rule of thumb, and let's say it's like this most of the time. I said before that you don't need to work with computers to do GIS, but of course we work most of the time with computers. So we work with computer software and we work with files. In the GIS world, we have one type of file which is called shapefile, which is unfortunately a standard. So every GIS software can use those files. This afternoon we will also work with this kind of files, which are actually vector files, so they contain vector data. Without going into the details, it's not a very good file type. You have lots of much better options when you work with GIS, but for many reasons this is a standard and this is what most of the people work with. The first reason why it's a bad type of file is because it's not one file. Now when you work with Word, you have a Word document, you have one document. It's your document doc, and you can take it on your USB, your flash drive, and go anywhere. But when you work with a shapefile, you have at least 3 files. You must at least have this file that's called DQF, the one which is called SHP, and the one which is called SHX. So if you don't have one of those files, your software will just not be able to do anything with that. So already you see that it's not very convenient. You need always to make sure if you copy data that you copy everything. So it's you have to be careful when you work with that, but still this is what we use most of the time. And why do you have all those different files? It's basically because one, the SHP contains the geometry, so all the geographic information of your data. The DBF contains the attributes table. So in this case, it's the information about the name, the population, or whatever of your oblast. And the SHX is the one that allows to link this SHP to this DBF. I know it's not very interesting, this slide, but it's important for you to understand this once you will be working with that this afternoon, because when you will look at the data, you will see that for each layer you have 3 or more than 3 files. It's important to know that you need all of them. Now, I said before that all maps lie. And to prove this, I would like to split you in 4 groups. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 4 groups of 3 people. I want you to take a look at those maps, try to bring them out, and order all those territories by size. So from the biggest one to the smallest one. Africa, China, Europe, Greenland, Russia, and USA. So you will look, no, you can. If we have few more together. Which is the biggest territory?
Russia.
Africa.
Russia.
Africa. What is the second one?
Second one, Africa.
And what is the smallest one? Europe. Okay. I'm almost disappointed because you gave almost the good answers. Why? Those who said that Africa is the biggest one, why do you think Africa is the biggest one? What map did you use to decide this? Because I think if you look at the different maps, you see different sizes.
Yeah.
So, yes, this one looks bigger, but the other ones, it looks smaller. So, do you have an idea why we have all those different maps first? Also?
Because some countries, they want to emphasize the power of their country, for example.
Okay, some countries want to emphasize their importance. So you think they are lying, they're just making up the maps and just exaggerating their surface?
No, Africa, this picture was taken because it was taken directly like this.
Okay.
On the center of
The center. Okay, good. So the center. I keep that in mind. Something else then? Someone wanted to say something?
I think we choose Russia because it's bigger. If we, for example, see like from a ball, we can see the center looks bigger compared to the other parts. But if we cut the whole surface and just put it somewhere on a flat, we can see that Russia is much more bigger than
Africa is the biggest one. Because
if you see the ball from here, it looks bigger, of course.
I mean, what about the maps? In reality,
we consider it in the maps, not in the squares or meters. We can use Wikipedia to check.
You can use Wikipedia to check it. That's what will come in the next slide. But that was the point. To look at those maps and to try to identify the real size. So you think that Russia is bigger than Africa,
our Earth is spherical, and we can see it on the other angles, to the outline and build the different sizes.
As we said, we are not seeing in this maps, we are not seeing the whole areas in perpendicular to our eyes, but in this map we are seeing all places just perpendicular to our minds, and it's unbiased.
Okay, so which map is correct? In each group, please show me which map is the most correct one. Show me the map that shows best the size of those territories. So can you just show on? Because you all have different maps. You say this one. So, what did you get from this? If you got something, so was it too boring? the main message that we live on Earth, which is round, which is not flat, and it is mathematically not possible to perfectly display this on a flat map. It is not possible. So when you want to create a map, you have to distort in one way or the other. Either you will distort the shapes. You remember we saw that depending how it was arranged, at some point we could see America very well, but what was on the other side of the world was completely distorted. Or, in the maps that you have here, the shapes are more or less okay, but the areas are completely wrong. So this means that it's very important to be very critical when you look at a map. You can, there are lots of ways to lie or to show things that are not completely correct on a map, but even if you try to do everything perfect in your analysis, you want to be super precise and everything, you will always lie at some point, because you have to decide how you will transfer your map from a globe, from the Earth, onto something flat. And this is extremely complex. Behind this are lots of very complex mathematical models, because you will use a different system if you want to show the whole Earth, or if you want to show only Kyrgyzstan, or if you want to show Switzerland, you need something different. So we will not go into the details of this, because this is way beyond the scope of this course. But please be critical. When you look at a map, try always to put things into perspective, because it doesn't always say what it seems to say at first sight. The third component is data. If you don't have data, of course, you cannot start anything, but it's not only about having data, especially here in Central Asia. You have lots of data that looks like this. If you go to the national institutions, they have lots of paper-based data. So what do you do with that? How can you put this into a GIS? You will need to type in, you will need to scan it, I don't know. This is not very convenient, but in some cases here it's the only way around, because there is no digital data. But of course, if you have access to digital data, it will make your life much easier. Quality of the data, again, think critically, because when you find data somewhere, and even if it's official data from a government, it doesn't always mean that the data is good. So try to take also some distance and to try to understand if your data is actually worth using. And the last component is, of course, the people, the person who will actually do some GIS. And as I said at the beginning, you don't always need to be a specialist in GIS to do something. You have one introductory course, you are interested, you can learn a lot by yourself. So just go and try. And then when the projects become bigger, then you need different types of skills, and it becomes, of course, more complex and it's a bit heavier. But for small projects, you can start today. Learning by doing. You have lots of resources online. If you look all over the internet, you find tutorials, you find everything you need to get started. And a very useful thing is also to build communities. If you have colleagues, if you have other students or people who are also interested, also working with this, work together, exchange, learn from each other. That's also a very efficient way to actually move forward and do better things. We have 2 more minutes. So what did we say at the beginning? We talked about physical maps, political maps, as being GIS. So I think you understood now that those are not GIS, but are part of GIS. I mean, a map is like the output of a GIS process. You collect data, you make an analysis, and at the end you will produce a map. Planning for construction, this I like a lot as well. Doing GIS is not only to display information and to make a nice map, it's also to help planning, to help do things. If you want to make a plan, an urban plan for Bishkek, you need to understand where are the people, where are the new places where people are building houses or new buildings. You need to understand the dynamics of the city. So you can use also GIS to make some models and to understand what might happen in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What do we have? Different type of maps. This is the same. Mapping is also here. Similar to GPS. So GPS is one technology that is part of GIS. It's just a technology that allows you to be located somewhere on Earth based on information you get from satellites. If you have any question again in the next days or weeks, you can always contact me by email or whatever if you think is not clear. Maybe actually I can circulate the email. I don't know if it's already somewhere on the servers.